this feature match. Oh, a lovely bit of camera work there from our production team, top tier. And here are two players having a browse of each other's deck lists. Again, I'm not sure exactly how long they get, at least a few minutes to identify what color inks the opponent is playing, and again, specific counts of specific cards. I'm just going to have a brief...
So both players with 48 points in Swiss. So we're going to get it confirmed to you who is the highest seed. They both got 48 points on day one, and therefore it's going to go down to some tiebreakers to decide who was the highest seed. And of course, the highest seed then will be going first in game number one. So that is going to be a nice difference maker. Sapphire Steel versus Amethyst Steel. Benja is going to be a really important card for Amethyst Steel. So Martin will be going first in this one.
Yep, he is the highest seed, so Martin has the pleasure of getting to go first, and that can make a huge difference. As you said, things like this Maleficent biding her time, 2 copies of that, 1 copy of Smash as well in the deck, which can answer a lot of prominent threats. And going back to what you mentioned earlier, the 2 copies of Tinkerbell, Tiny Tactician. This creates mind games, because as soon as this comes down, you know that there's a potential for a shift from turn 4, and then Tinkerbell is a very good card if you didn't know. So you have to respect the Tiny Tactician all of the time.
No, absolutely. I think one thing that I did see that didn't quite go right for Martin, and Martin will be the player going first in this one. They did get the better tiebreakers, and therefore they are the highest seed. One thing that they are going to be looking out to avoid is a situation where they end up with grab your sword stuck in their hand. They only have 1 copy of it, but what I saw in their top 64 game is they drew grab your sword off the mulligan, and then it just stayed in their hand the entire game. So that's going to be something they want to avoid for sure. So there are 2 copies of that Maleficent, as you mentioned, and there are 4 copies of Chernobogs, 4 copies of Magic Brooms, only 3 copies of Madam Mim Fox. That is not something you see very often, Baker.
No, it is not. That is extremely curious. I'd be very interested to talk to him about what led him to that decision. Madam Mim Fox has been an absolute staple in the game since its release in Rise of the Floodborn. Such a diverse character. That 4 strength grid checks a lot of characters, and of course this bounce mechanic of having to return a character to your hand, which some people may have looked at as a negative, but it really isn't. It helps to protect characters, reuse come into play effects. But we're going back over to the table now. They're just going to do a little pile shuffle, make sure that they've got all the cards they need. And shall we go over and have a look at this Sapphire Steel deck and see if we can find some interesting counts? I'll just get that up.
Yeah, so Martin going to be going first. And again, when I was watching their top 64 game very closely, they did have a couple of games where they inked a card on turn 1 and played nothing, and then they inked a card on turn 2 and then played nothing. They are going to really be wanting to avoid that. So if they don't see those Magic Brooms, those Chernobogs followers in the opening hand, expect to see a pretty aggressive mulligan from Martin. The Sapphire Steel player then, Baker, you're looking through their list?
I am, yeah.
Catch your eye?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to say already. So for a start, we are seeing 2 copies of the 1-drop Captain Hook Forceful Duelist. Now, these Sapphire Steel decks don't tend to run 1-drops very often. They'll run 2-drops, like we are seeing 2 copies of Argus in here, which is absolutely there for against the Ruby Amethyst matchups. It helps you against the Flynn Rider. The 4 strength is really good for taking out Queen's Castle, but they don't normally play a 1-drop, and of course, because the Amethyst Steel player is going first, if they do get that Maleficent biding her time, then the Sapphire Steel player really wants that Captain Hook down early to be able to remove it, otherwise it might just start to run away with the game. 3 copies of Grab Your Swords in the Sapphire Steel decks, 2 Let It Go, 2 Lucky Dime, 1 copy of that Rise of the Titans, which will absolutely be relevant for Martin's Queen's Castles.
There's Fishbone Quill in the opening hand for Yarno. That's a really good start.
Yep.
Martin's going to be going first. They do have that Smee for turn 2.
Nice.
But I don't think there is a Chernobox followers as well. So Martin has a card to play on turn 1 and a card to play on turn 2. Now, Baker, you talked about what are you looking to do in this matchup with that Amethyst Steel?
Against it.
What you can do, as Amethyst Steel, what you're looking to do is you're looking to get as much questing power as early as possible, but then you want to play around the potential board wipe. So the Chernobogs followers is a great option. You can quest with the Chernobogs. If Yarno doesn't have a character down on their board on turn 1, you can then keep questing as much as you can possibly risk, and then at the last moment you want to draw with that Chernobogs followers. It's 4 cards mulliganed for Martin.
Yeah, definitely want to utilize those cards as well as possible. Get as much as you can out of your Chernobog's followers before you trigger that draw. Super powerful one drop in the game.
Absolutely. So Yarno had Fishbone Quill, had Mickey Mouse in hand. When you're up against Bengers, you're probably going to prefer the option of Mickey Mouse on turn 3.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be interesting to see if Yarno did hold on to that Fishbone Quill or did mulligan. Would be really interested actually just to see how many Bengers are going to be in that deck list. That would be really interesting to see. Baker's helping me out here. My phone's miles away, but he's taking a look at the deck list.
You are all good, but I've got some very interesting information for you, my friend.
Yep.
None.
Is there really not any?
There are no Bengers in this list unless you can see something I'm missing, but I'm not seeing
the list. That one's the Sapphire.
Oh, am I on the wrong list? Am I on the wrong list? I apologise.
No Sapphire Steel Bengers, which we'd probably expect.
We're seeing 3. We're seeing 3.
That seems like a nice amount.
My apologies for that previous misinformation. Yeah, 3 copies of Benger. So as you say, yeah, that will be really important. And just to clarify, our Sapphire Steel player is on 4 copies of A Whole New World. Just to clarify, because not all of them are. So we see a turn 1 ink. Down comes that Chernobog's followers. As you said, can put on a lot of pressure early.
Yeah, and we do see Yarno mulliganing away that Fishbone Quill, preferring the Mickey Mouse. Not usually what you see, but again, when you know your opponent's got 3 copies of Benger, it's definitely going to be of interest. Now, the other thing is Martin even using Benger on a Fortosphere or a Porpsicle is going to be nice, as it's going to deny the potential card draw from Flaversham later on. Yarno's still, of course, going to play the Porpsicle. Why not? It draws you a card. And it's going to be back on over to Martin. And Martin's going to be very happy. No Captain Hook down on the board. This Chernobog's is going to be able to quest here and stay down. Now, another thing Yarno doesn't have access to is Fire the Cannons. 3 baboons in the deck, but no copies of Fire the Cannons, and that is going to be music to Martin's ears. Friends is inked, perhaps expecting A Whole New World, and in comes the bumbling mate for Martin. This is the opener they were looking for. Maleficent biding her time, probably better than Chernobog's, but Chernobog's is still able to replace itself by banishing and drawing a card when the moment is right for Martin.
Yeah, super aggressive opening, and as you say, because Yarno wasn't able to get down that 1-drop Captain Hook, the Chernobog's followers is quite safe to just sit there on the board. He can get another quest out of it next turn and won't draw off of it until it's absolutely necessary. In Yarno's hand, we do see that Argus. He's flicking a copy of Cogsworth, probably going to make its way into the Inkwell, and we already see that copy of Grab Your Swords in Yarno's hand as well, which could be a difference maker.
And Argus is nice. It can remove either Smee or Chernobog's, but the problem is it's then going to be banished when it does so. Yarno didn't find a baboon on this turn, and I think Martin is going to be really happy with the start. Interesting option to go Magic Broom and Mr. Smee this turn. They're going to double quest. A big decision on the Chernobog's followers if they draw with it. I would anticipate that Martin is going to leave it on the board because Mr. Smee could be removed by the Argus anyway, and they need as much questing power as possible in this early game, and that is what they decide to do.
Yeah, in this instance, going to make Yarno choose between the 2 characters rather than just basically conceding it.
Such a good opener from Martin.
Wow.
This is how you play this matchup. You get as much questing in as early as possible, and Yarno, without that baboon, without that Fire the Cannons, is starting to struggle a little bit here. This is going very well for Martin so far, but it is going to be very easy for Yarno to remove many characters in a single swoop in a few turns. Yeah,
100%. And let's not forget, it's been kind of the story of Sapphire Steel over the weekend. They have very slow starts. Quite often we see them fall well behind in lore, but that combination of Lucky Dime plus Tamatoa can just help them make insane jumps and clutch out the game. So yeah, a slow start from Yarno, but do not call him out of this game yet. It's still time for him to bring it back. And we pass back over to Martin. He's going to re-ready his characters. Ready, set, draw. Our Sapphire Steel player also playing 1 copy of Aerial Treasure Collector, just as a note, which is another really aggressive character that can work with that Lucky Dime, potentially questing for 5 if you've got more items than your opponent, which I imagine they're going to have more items than the Amethyst Steel player, Joe. Yeah,
I think you could be right, and this is a great time for Martin to use that draw of Chernobog's. Because the Mickey Mouse is now down on the board with that 1 strength, it would be able to challenge into Chernobog's followers and remove it, but there's also the threat potentially of Grab Your Sword. So Martin Martin picks the right moment to banish the Chernobyls. We didn't see them do it in the previous turn, and they got 1 law extra as a result. And we see the Madam Mim, and is Mr. Smee back?
Oh,
it certainly is.
This is
ready to go
aggressive.
again.
Yeah, sorry, cut you off there. This is super aggressive, man. And like Yarno has a lot of catching up to do. Martin already on 8 law with another potential 4 law already on board. This Mickey Mouse will not be able to take out this Magic Broom, who has 2 willpower. But yeah, this is looking like a really nice start for Martin. Yarno gets down the grandfather clock. Cogsworth, who has ward, is going to give resist 1. Questing up with the Mickey Mouse, getting the first law on the board for Yarno. So what does Yarno need to do now here to kind of combat this early aggressive stage from Martin?
Well, I think Yarno is still in a position where they can win. A whole new world might be a bad idea because it's going to give Martin access to more goats and things like that.
Yep.
Just try and keep removing as many cards as possible and deny as much card draw as possible. The Magic Broom quest first, and we're going to see the rabbit. You can draw off the rabbit first. It goes into the bag, and now the Magic Broom can be banished to draw a card for Martin if they so decide. So they're now deciding if they want to banish the Magic Broom or leave it on the board, and they decide to leave it on the board for now as they quest with everything. Martin is kind of taking the risk that there might be a grab your swords coming, because the broom could have been banished to draw, but Martin instead decides, okay, well, if you don't have grab your swords, I'm probably winning the game. And the question is, does Yarno have it? Well, they do.
Certainly does. He's had it since the beginning of the game. So, but I still think that was a good play from Martin. And he's finding that mid-stage between Cogsworth's on the board. He knows that Yarno could potentially whole new world. So you want to find this sort of happy medium in your hand where you have enough resources, but you don't want to overdraw to the fat point where Yarno just gets far too much value out of the whole new world. Because see Tinkerbell come down, and Cogsworth does exert to sing grab your swords, grab your bow, and remove all of these characters from the board. Martin's going to draw off the rabbit. Nice board clear.
Yeah, and this is kind of how this matchup tends to go, and Martin's done a good job of getting to 12 at this stage. If he's down at 8, it can be pretty difficult to recover from this position, but the rabbit's drawing cards, finds a goat. I will say, Baker, I would have liked to have seen Martin draw from that Magic Broom in the previous turn.
Okay.
It was a risk, it was a calculated risk, I'm sure they have their reasons, but the grab your swords then comes through, clears the Magic Broom. It could have been an extra card in hand potentially. So it was definitely a big decision from Martin, and it didn't work out in their favor in this particular instance because the grab your swords was there. Having said that, if Yarno didn't have grab your swords, Martin would have been very heavily rewarded for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are points in the game of Lorcana on like the big stages where sometimes you just have to take the risk, or you have to be a little bit greedy, and that's not always going to pay off, but I absolutely respect it. We're in the top 16. Martin wants to go all the way, so he took a calculated risk, didn't pay off, but I respect his thought trail. We're going to see another Mickey coming down for Yarno, who's going to ramp the top card of the deck straight into the Inkwell. And yeah, Yarno's sitting with quite an oppressive field here. And what can Martin do to sort of subvert this? Obviously, he's got access to things like Tinkerbell, but if you're Martin, what are you looking for to kind of stabilize here?
You're just looking for questing power. You're just looking for goats. You're just looking to cross the line. You have to accept that the Sapphire Steel player now has the board control.
Gotcha.
And that's where that early questing power, that early curve was just so important. Smash is the card found, most likely just going to be going into the Inkwell here, and Martin just going to be looking to quest. The Tinkerbell is a bit of a concern though, Baker, because it could remove the Madam Mim and deal 2 damage to another character, so you're not going to want to play any character on the board here for Martin with 2 willpower or less. But then of course there's also the worry that there could be something like another Tinkerbell or a grab your swords. There is no items on the board yet for Yarno, and only 1 card in hand, so Martin can start trying to win a bit of a battle for the card draw as well. As the goat enters the board, the snake is going to quest, 2 ink still remaining, and a smash is going to be going into the Inkwell, it seems, and there is a fox available to bounce that goat back into safety.
Yeah, that's pretty good, because obviously next turn, as you mentioned, this Tinkerbell will be able to challenge and take out this snake, and the puny pirate ability will put 2 damage. Well, it would have put 2 damage, but it's going to be bounced immediately back to the hand. And it's like you say, Joe, Martin just needs to accept the fact that I'm not contesting the board here. I'm at 12 law or 15 now. I just need to race the game, and that goat in hand is going to be making Yarno sweat.
Baker, I love this play by Yarno. Had the option of rushing in with the fox and removing a Mickey Mouse, but deciding instead to leave the fox ready readied because they just value that protection and that ability to quest with one lore next turn. Every lore matters in this game. So while you could deny one lore potentially for Yarno by removing a Mickey Mouse, it also, more importantly, might mean that you miss out on one lore, which is why Martin decides not to rush with the Fox, but leave it ready. There is the Tinkerbell, 2 damage counters onto the Madam Mim, but with that 3 willpower, she is safe for now. Yarno did not draw that Tinkerbell or grab your swords.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Super smart decision to just use the Fox as another character to quest on the following turn. He's already at 15 lore. He's got a Merlin goat in hand and more in the deck, and we're just a couple of goat bounces away from game. So yeah, I really rate that decision. Yarno coming down with the Tamatoa, big 8-cost Inkable, who's going to return an item from the discard to the hand, which I believe we took a Porpsicle. Rise of the Titans into the Inkwell, and I expect this Porpsicle is going to come down, draw Yarno an additional card, and of course, items are exactly what cards like Tamatoa, Ariel, and Flavish want to see. That's an Along Came Zeus. That's a pretty good pickup.
It's a really interesting option for Yarno because now Yarno has the option of exerting this Cogsworth to sing the Zeus and remove the Madam Mim from the board. Now that might seem like overkill, and it certainly is, but every lore matters, and Yarno might be forced to remove this Madam Mim, but decides to hold on, it seems, for this Zeus for a rainy day, and they're going to be trying to use this to remove a bigger threat down the line. Now Martin's going to draw, finds a Baboom off the top. There is a rabbit, a goat, and a Queen's Castle, I do believe, in the hand. Yarno is 11 away. Tamatoa on the board, only 1 item on the board currently, so it's only questing for 2, Baker.
This Baboom probably not going to help too much to influence this field, but rabbits get you draw, Merlins are going to get you lore, and Zeus may be able to help to potentially get this Tinkerbell off the field. This is something that Martin's worried that is going to prevent him from getting to the game. We're getting to game. We're going to play the rabbit.
Oh, it's a snake off the top.
Was it a snake?
It's so big for the goat. Now, Martin's in an interesting spot here because they can go for 4 for the goat, but then it's going to leave it on the board at the end of the turn, which is going to give Yarno an opportunity to use that Zeus they held onto to remove it from play, denying the snake bounce in the next turn.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And Yarno, let's not forget, has 2 more copies of Grab Your Swords in the deck. Could be a huge top deck as well to assist. But yeah, being able to remove that goat is big. Most players want to return it to their hand so that it's safe to be able to continue to bounce it. But again, Martin at 17 lore now after putting that goat down on the board. He's very, very close. Can Yarno stop Martin from getting to
Whole New World is not what you want to find at this moment in time, because of course, if you go for a Whole New World, Martin's got 7, in fact 8 opportunities to draw into some more goats. Now, Yarno can quest for a total of 4, 6 plus the Tamatoa. So Tamatoa currently questing for 2, so they can get up to 15 without the Tamatoa. If Martin could get down 4 items, then they would in theory be able to get across the finish line, but of course that's pretty unlikely to happen. They are going to use the Porpsicle to heal nothing, as now Tamatoa just quests for 1, but it is going to be able to get that Porpsicle back into Yarno's hand, and an opportunity to find 1 more card off the top, and it's another Porpsicle. Guess what, Baker? That means they can have another card off the top.
Another one.
And it's going to be a Grab Your Sword. That could be big. Is it good?
That
don't know if that's what Yarno's looking for. Whole New World, Grab Your Sword, Zeus in the hand for Yarno.
Could play this Grab Your Swords, but the goat and the rabbit down to 1 willpower, meaning that if Tinkerbell takes out this fox, it will be able to finish off. The goat is really what Yarno wants to go. Yarno's going to be aware that Martin has a big bounce package, and that goat is a key to victory. So some options in the hand here, but yeah, Yarno not in the best position. Just Martin has done such a good job of racing to game. Those early few stages, being able to just quest freely and not be threatened, were huge. The Mickey Mouse, I believe, making a trade there with the Madam Mim Fox makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
so the Madam Mim Fox is removed. There is the Zeus onto the goat. No surprises there. Martin now up to 18, and that rabbit still down on the board. Cogsworth is going to quest. Tinkerbell's going to quest. And now Yarno is in a position at 16 where Martin really needs to win this turn. Do they find the goat? Goat would win the game for Martin here. They quest for 1 with the rabbit. They're up to 19. All they need is a goat to win the game. They bounce the snake.
Can we find it?
Goat off the top. It's a friend.
Do we have enough ink?
7 ink total to be able to get there. Friends is played. 2 cards drawn. It's a Baboom and it's a fox, and I don't think Martin can cross the finish line. Yarno being able to remove that goat with the Zeus, denying the goat bounce. Now, Baker, Martin potentially could have not played that goat the last turn and gone goat bounce this turn. But then the Zeus, instead of removing the goat, would have removed the rabbit. Yarno gets there just about. Yarno the winner of game one.
Wow.
What a game. I also, Baker, want to just mention that Magic Broom card draw. Could that have made a difference as well? There was the opportunity for Martin to draw with the Magic Broom. It was then removed by Grab Your Swords. Fine margins indeed when you get to 19 lore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That one card dig could have made all the difference. As we said, a risk was taken, saying, hey, if you don't have the Grab Your Swords, then I have a huge board here. I'm going to continue to just race far quicker than you. Was punished for it, but again, I respect the decision. But yeah, the first game taken by our Sapphire Steel player. Again, we are in 2 out of 3, so the Amethyst Steel player will get to go first again this time. Yeah. So maybe they can play it a bit differently. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. That Merlin goat coming down was really a big decision, but was kind of punished for it. It was removed by the Zeus, so wasn't able to make that goat bounce play.
Yeah, and the problem is for Martin, if they didn't play the goat, then they had 4 ink left. They could have played the snake onto the rabbit, but then you really want to save the snake for the goat. If they played the goat, if they didn't play the goat, well, that Zeus would have just been used on the rabbit, and then they still would have been 1 short anyway.
Yeah, no guarantee that it would have changed anything.
I think the big decision from Martin, which they're probably going to be regretting in hindsight, is not drawing with that Magic Broom when the Grab Your Swords came through. If Grab Your Swords didn't come through from Yarno, they're probably winning the game on the spot. But I'm not sure if it was a risk that they needed to take. I was anticipating them to draw with the Magic Broom. What a game it was. Really, really exciting stuff. So Martin is going to be going first again, and Yarno going to be going second. Look for a kind of similar play pattern. Worth noting as well, Baker, a Maleficent biding her time on turn 1, it gains 1 extra lore compared to a Chernobog. That's the kind of difference maker you often need in this matchup. That Maleficent could be really, really big on turn 1 for Amethyst Steel. Yeah,
100%. And as we said, our Sapphire Steel player, Yarno, does have those 2 copies of Captain Hook. Wasn't able to find one in the first game, but didn't make much of a difference. Our Amethyst Steel player was able to race really efficiently, but Sapphire Steel catching up, able to control the board. And yeah, we're going to be moving into game 2. Our players drawing their first 7 cards. If you're new to Lorcana, there is a mulligan stage in Lorcana. Both players will be able to look at these 7, throw as many as they want back to the bottom of the deck, and then draw back up to 7 before shuffling again. And this part of the game where you curate your hand is one of the biggest skill tiers in the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, it looks like Zeus, Grab Your Swords, and Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician being gotten rid of by Martin for now. They're certainly going to hold on to that Chernobog's followers, and it looks like they're going to hold on to Lawrence. They're going to be looking for Mr. Smee on turn number 2. Maleficent biding her time would also be great. Now, Yarno doesn't have access to any ramp this time, Baker. They do have Mr. Smee for turn 2, but they don't have that 1-cost Captain Hook, which they might like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're going to be throwing 4 cards back into the deck.
Looking for that ramp. They only play 3 copies of Mickey Mouse, interestingly, and it does seem as though they missed the ramp, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's 3 copies of Mickey Mouse, and of course the 4 Fishbone Quill, but as you mentioned earlier, Martin does have access to these Bengers that could immediately punish that. I thought we missed 1 drop. We do have a Porpsicle, so that's a start, but you got to imagine the Captain Hook would have been the preference.
Yeah, Captain Hook would be nice. Also Babooms to try and answer those aggressive questing threats. They don't have Fire the Cannons. Interesting that they did also get rid of Grab Your Swords Tinkerbell. Maybe if they had the Fishbone Quill or the Mickey in the opening hand, those cards could have been kept. Now, Martin has not got that Maleficent, but they do have a Chernobog's for turn 2, and a Chernobog's for turn 1, rather, and potentially a Chernobog's for turn 2 as well. So they're going to be really hoping to find, off the top, either a Mr. Smee for turn 2, I would be surprised if Martin inks the Chernobog's here, because if they top deck another 1-drop, they're going to be able to go for that triple 1-drop by turn 2 play, and they do decide to ink the Baboom as a result, which I really like to see. Yeah,
and you saw when Martin was mulliganing, he was considering the idea of keeping that Queen's Castle, which I get the temptation. Sapphire Steel can really struggle to deal with them, but
draw, it's a rabbit.
It is a rabbit, but no, prioritizing wanting to find those 1-drops, and yeah, as you say, this could be just a aggressive collection of 1-drops hitting the field on the next turn. We're going to ink the Madam Mim Fox. and I expect it will be that Chernobog's followers coming down. The first one's going to quest. I expect it will stay on the board because Yarno's not going to have a way of dealing with it efficiently. Of course, things like Baboom could make the difference, but the Chernobog seems pretty safe.
Yeah, and if Martin draws with this Chernobog's followers, the other one can get Baboom. So really good to see that Martin made that decision to ink Baboom on turn 1. They did have the option of playing the Madamim Snake on turn 2 and bouncing the Chernobog's followers back to the hand. But the game plan for Amethyst Steel in this one is just get as much lore as you possibly can in the early game and then regain the board. Interestingly, the Chernobog's comes off the top now, just one turn too late. They would have loved to have played that down as a double Chernobog's play on turn 2. Now the Chernobog's followers, it seems like Martin is going to be an option to draw with.
Going to keep it on the first one on the board.
Yeah, I actually like this decision because now the Smee can challenge a Chernobog's followers, but the Smee would get removed from the board as well, as there's no captain. Now what Yarno can do is they could challenge the Chernobogs with Smee and then use the Porpsicle to heal Smee to keep the Smee on the board.
Yep, absolutely. Or alternatively, the Captain Hook.
On to the players. Everything is sorted. Everything's good to go. So it is going to be moving on to Yarno's turn. They haven't yet inked. We saw Martin quested those two Chernobog's followers, not drawing with either of them and putting that Lawrence down on the board. So there's now 2 ink available for Yarno, and it looks like that Beast Hard-Headed might be going into the Inkwell.
Quite possibly. We may play this Fortisphere first to draw and then ink, but we will find out. No Mickey Mouse Detective in the deck, in the hand, which would be a nice play here. Ink, play the Detective, ramp up for 5, but that's not going to be an option. We do have Flavisham, won't be online until next turn, but that's another reason why he may be tempted to keep this Porpsicle on the field. You mentioned that there's a nice play that would help keep Smee, but then the Porpsicle's gone for the Flavisham on the next turn. But there is a Fortisphere in hand. It depends how desperate Yarno is for card draw, really, but at the moment, they seem to have some cards. There's that Lucky Dime in the hand, not great at this point in the game, but later on that could absolutely be a difference maker.
Yeah, there is that Captain Hook, and it is going to go into the Inkwell, so there was the option of playing the Captain Hook, and it's going to be Smee Captain Hook. Are we going to see that Porpsicle healing the Smee to keep it on the board? Because there was, of course, the option of playing the Hook, but going for the Fortisphere instead, and the Porpsicle is going to heal the Smee.
Like it.
Chernobog's followers into the discard, and there's another Chernobog's followers still on the board.
Brilliant play, and yet then Smee just taking 1 damage for the end of the turn for not having a captain on board, and we move over to Martin, who is holding 2 copies of Merlin Rabbit, I believe that is, 1 Fox and 1 Snake. The pretty much all the bounce package in Martin's hand. He is going to take that quest with Chernobog and dig for another card. It's a Queen's Castle, which is a very strong card in this Sapphire Steel matchup, but with 2 Mr. Smees on the board, can't quite deal with the Queen's Castle, but I think you want to wait to play the Queen's Castle until you are more guaranteed it's going to get more longevity out of it. But Yarno is running 1 copy of Rise of the Titans, so these Queen's Castles are going to be really important potentially. We're going to quest with Lawrence up to 2.
And this is a really good example of how Lawrence, or why Lawrence is such a powerful character. With this 4/4 stat line, it may have 0 strength, but if it's got no damage on it, it is a 4/4. And those Mr. Smees are not only not going to be able to remove it, if they did, they would be banished themselves. So this Lawrence is going to continue to quest for quite a while longer. Flavisham's going to banish the Fortisphere, draw 2 cards. Of course, Yarno could challenge the Lawrence with both Smees, and only 1 would be removed from the board. So that is an interesting option. The Rabbit on Martin's side can't be challenged. That is going to happen. So 1 Smee is removed by Lawrence, but then Lawrence has 0 strength when it has damage, so the second Smee is able to remove it and not take any damage, but it does take 1 damage as there's no captains on the board, as it's now Martin's turn.
Yeah, super nice play, being able to take out that Lawrence, as you said, as soon as it takes any damage.
Oh, Baboom! Hello!
Baboom! I did that for Ross, he's been saying that all weekend. We're going to see the Rabbit singing Friends on the Other Side. We draw 2 cards.
It's another Friends and another Goat.
Very nice.
Good options to have if your name is Martin right now.
Absolutely, already at 6 lore, still quite a way to go, but this is certainly going to help. We're going to see that Snake, and this is the Amethyst package doing exactly what it wants to do, recycling these rabbits, obviously drawing a card when it enters and exits play, also just protecting the rabbit from being taken out. Obviously there's nothing on Yarno's board at the moment that could take it out, but that could very quickly change. So loving this. We're going to ink that Queen's Castle, and down comes that Chernobog's followers.
Yeah, and while Martin's had a slower start to this game, we saw them getting to around like 12 lore in the previous game. The other thing that has happened is that Yarno has not ramped. So Yarno is not going to be able to get that kind of explosive questing power that we saw in the previous game, where they got that Tamatoa down, and with a couple of quests, they were able to get to 20. That is not going to happen this time. So Martin's got more time to work with.
Yep.
And therefore that bounce package of bouncing the rabbit back and having more cards in hand is definitely going to be relevant, because it's going to be a longer game. It is going to be the beast hard-headed onto the board. Not exactly what you're looking to spend 5 ink on, Baker.
Not really, no.
Can sing grab your swords next turn, which is going to be a big threat for Martin.
Yeah, and that 4/4 stat line should compete with most of the cards in Martin's deck, should be able to deal with them, and of course it does just quest for 2. But yeah, Martin's in this weird stage of when you're playing the Amethyst package, you know you're long came Zeus onto the beast hard-headed, immediately removing that tempo that Yarno was trying to build. But yeah, if you know your opponent's playing a whole new world, you need to find that mid-stage. You don't want to have no cards in your hand, but if you overdo it, you really tempt them into that whole new world. And just throwing down a Smee here on Martin's side of the board, just super low-pressure characters. Low-cost, high-pressure characters,
absolutely.
I meant to say.
And I love this play by Martin. It might seem a bit odd. Why are you using Zeus on a simple beast hard-headed? Well, the threat was that Yarno could sing grab your swords, get to 6 ink and play Tink, which was exactly what Yarno was probably planning on doing, and then this Madam Mim Snake and the Smee would be removed, and that is 3 lore lost for Martin. So deciding, instead of developing another character, just paying 4 to play Zeus. Of course, ideally, you get that 4-cost character down and you sing Zeus, because it costs you nothing to do so. But Martin realizing that wasn't going to help him in that situation, and I really love that play. There is the Tink. No items for Flavisham right now yet either, Baker. So that healing of the Porpsicle we saw earlier is now denying Yarno potential card draw.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I still I agree with the play he made to protect the Smee, but you got to imagine he wanted to find some more items to work with this Flavisham by now. Hasn't happened as of yet. We're over on to Martin, who
Martin's
has
a goat, Baker.
A couple of goats in hand now. He's eyeing up a rabbit. The rabbit on board, working out what he wants to do with that, potentially questing. But yeah, go back to your previous.
Another goat, Baker.
Is that 3 goats?
3 goats in Martin's hand right now.
That is pretty crazy. That's going to really help Martin close out the game. We're at 11 lore now. So yeah, these 3 goats are like super online at this point and going to provide a lot of pressure. And yeah, just a quick note to say, being able to exert characters to sing songs for no ink cost is one of the most powerful things to do in Lorcana. And Sapphire Steel player in particular definitely always wants to be singing those songs with a character so that you can still continue to apply pressure to the board. So removing that beast hard-headed with the Zeus on the previous turn, I think has really changed this game for Martin. Otherwise, he'd have had a clear board at this point.
Yeah. So Yarno can sing grab your swords with Tinkerbell, play another Tinkerbell, for example. That would clear the whole board again, but might instead decide to challenge with Tinkerbell. That is what they do. And then the 2 damage counters are going to go onto the rabbit, and in comes the second Tinkerbell, clearing the Smee and the rabbit. Martin's going to draw, though, from the rabbit, entering the discard. Martin is not going to be too happy about that, but you know what they are going to be happy about? 4 goats in the hand.
4! That's a lot of goats, Joe. That's an awful lot of goats. Yeah, this is a lot of pressure if you can just chain these. But you know what he really wants is some bounce cards to be able to return them to his hand. We're also seeing a Benja, but no items on Yarno's side of the board. Hasn't been able to utilize that Flavisham. But yeah, these 4 goats are huge.
Now, I say that Martin's going to be happy about the 4 goats. However, I believe they're not too happy, because I think they're currently at 6 ink, which would mean that they can't play double goat this turn, if I'm not mistaken. Now, what they could do is they could ink a goat and play Benja plus goat, because you need as much questing power as possible. So it is going to be a goat, 2 ink remaining. Now, does Martin ink a goat to play Benja? Do they ink Benja to hold on to the goats? It's a really big decision for Martin. I would wager we might see a goat getting inked to play the Benja, because you need as much questing power as possible. Now, next turn, if Martin finds an inkable, they can go double goat.
Yep, for sure. And plus, again, if we find these bounce cards like Snakes and Fox, we can continue to bounce them back to the hand. Yeah, I imagine Yarno was quite surprised to see that goat go into the inkwell, but it does make sense. As you say, you want to fully utilize your inkwell, and Benja questing for 2 is quite big, even though wasn't able to remove an item. So, yeah, nice play.
In is going to come Aerial Treasure Collector, currently questing for 3.
Yes, no items on the board at the moment. Are there any in hand?
There is a dime.
There is a dime.
So dime could come down for Yarno next turn.
As you said, Yarno hasn't been able to ramp efficiently in this game. We normally see these Sapphire decks able to make these huge moves by this point in the game, but Yarno missing the Mickey, missed the Fishbone Quill, and of course playing Quill would have been risky against the Benger anyway. We're going to quest up with everything.
Yeah, lots of questing from Yarno, bumps them up to 6. Now they can quest next turn if they play the dime with the Aerial for 5, but they won't have enough ink to also exert the dime to get 5 more lore from Aerial. So Yarno currently can get 8 lore next turn. It's a goat. It's another goat.
Oh,
and the crowd has loved that one here. Triple goat, all on the board. 1 in the inkwell as well, just for good measure.
Yeah, this seems like the route to Martin bringing this to a 1-1. And yeah, this game is being shown on a screen in the main hall. We can't see them, but we can certainly hear them. I imagine there's a big crowd around there. But yeah, we're definitely reaching the later stages of this game. Yarno has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ink on board. Potentially can play that lucky dime. So I think Yarno is on a 2-turn clock here. But Martin with 3 goats and 1 Benger is already, it'll be game. If Martin goes into his turn, he has brought it to 1-1. Can Yarno interrupt?
Yeah, and while Martin had a slower start this game, they didn't have that Smee on turn 2. It was just a Chernobog's followers. Yarno just didn't find that ramp, and they are only playing 3 copies of Mickey Mouse. And we saw how impactful that Mickey Mouse was in game 1. In fact, they mulligan Fishbone Quill to keep that Mickey Mouse in their opening hand. Now, Flaversham could, interestingly enough, banish the lucky dime to draw 2 cards here. They're not going to do that, though. They are going to quest of everything, but 14 lore is needed, and it's not going to be 14 lore. Yarno is taken down by Martin, but we're going to game number 3. Martin, though, going to be going second for the first time in this series.
And I think that is going to make a huge difference if on turn 1 Yarno can get down a Captain Hook, immediately checking things like that Maleficent biding her time, who we're still to see hit the board. But yeah, going second, it's a very different game for the Amethyst Steel player. And yeah, super good game. He was he seemed disappointed with the multiple goats, but it allowed him to make that big extension onto the board and just guarantee game next turn, because of course goats give you extra lore just for leaving and entering the board. So super good game. We are going to game 3. Which of these 2 players are going to be proceeding to the top 8 and winning themselves a Mickey Mouse BLT? They're both already qualified for the European Championships. They've got the Rapunzel playmat. They've got the Rapunzel card, the Stout-Hearted card, but they want more.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how Martin tries to maneuver what is a pretty tricky matchup, even when you go first, but going second. I think Benger on turn 3 could be a really big deal. If Yarno doesn't have access to that Mickey Mouse, of course it's open lists, so Martin's going to know there's just 3 copies of Mickey Mouse in the deck. So Yarno would go Fishbone Quill on turn 3, and then bam, turn 3 for Amethyst Steel. Benger to shut that down could be a really, really big deal. If you can deny the ramp options of Sapphire Steel, the deck becomes slightly less intimidating. I can see a couple copies of Tinkerbell. There's a lot of rabbits. Martin could also kind of take the approach to really just try and outdraw their opponent. There is Fishbone Quill and Mickey Mouse in hand for Yarno, which is exactly what they're going to be looking to see. Looks like Fishbone Quill's getting mulliganed again. Mickey Mouse the preferred option on turn 3 for Yarno, fearing those Bengers.
Question for you, Joe. If you are on the draw going second like Martin here, how aggressively are you looking for this Benger? Do you think it's that important?
Good question. I think that in an open deck list format, you probably anticipate your opponent to have the Mickey, but you just want to really be able to punish them if they don't.
Right.
If they don't have the Mickey and they end up playing that Fishbone Quill, you really, really do want to be removing it from the board as swiftly as possible. I think for Martin, it might not seem like it's exactly what you want, but the Chernobog's followers on 1, and then on turn 2, like Magic Broom Chernobogs again, and then you just try and draw with all of these cards as much as possible before the board wipe can come through, could be a very nice approach. Also, maybe that Maleficent biding her time on turn 1 into something like a Madam Mim Snake on turn 2 to bounce it back and replay it later. It could be a good option. We didn't see Yarno find that Captain Hook on turn 1 yet, so Martin might be able to quest with the turn 1 play uncontested. Of course, a Smee on 2 or a Baboom on 2 would be a great option for Yarno as well. So I think if Yarno finds those early game cards, it's going to be a real struggle for Martin.
Yeah, 100%. Only 2 copies of the Captain Hook in the deck. We are yet to see it, but it still may make an impact, and even if it's just protecting Mr. Smee because of the Captain on board, we're going to be cutting each other's decks. I think our players are very, very similar coloured sleeves. Maybe a twinge more purple from Yarno. We see the fist bump, and we move into game 3. Who will be going on to top 8? Will it be Yarno? Will it be Martin? Let's find out. Yarno's going first.
Yarno has lots of cards to play on turn 2. A Smee, a Baboom, and an Argus, but nothing on turn 1. Not even a Porpsicle or a Fortosphere.
Okay, so definitely going to be pleased that they are going first, because going second with no 1-drop is huge.
It's going to happen.
Are we seeing it?
Finally, time. Maleficent has been biding her time here
Nicely done.
in this series. Is this the moment, or is Martin going to decide to maybe try and play this Maleficent down a little bit later, because it could get baboomed? It is uninkable, of course, so you're going to have to play it at some point. You would imagine it's going to come into the play. Martin really just taking the time on what to ink. It's going to be the Broom, and Maleficent biding her time.
Here she is.
Enters the board. A card which is uninkable. It only has 1 strength and 1 willpower, but it can quest for 2.
And Martin is holding this Madam Mim snake, as you said, so does have that option available to him to be able to quest with this Maleficent and then just bounce it back to his hand, put the snake on board, which has the exact same strength and willpower as Mr. Smee. So that's a nice little check there, and of course leaving Maleficent to bide her time in the hand for another day. I appreciate that pun.
Nice.
Top marks for that, my man.
It's going to be the Fox, which gets inked. It is going to be a Chernobog's Followers, and another Chernobog's Followers.
Okay.
I love it. So many 1-drops down on the board, and Yarno is going to be pretty spooked about this.
Yep. We'll be able to take out this Maleficent with the Mr. Smee. We'll only take 1 damage, and then he'll take an extra 1 damage at the end of the turn if there's not a captain on board, but then at least still survives, and next turn will be available to take out something else or quest. And if you can get a 2 for 1 out of Smee, that feels pretty good.
Now, what's interesting for Martin is they do decide to quest with the Maleficent. However, if they had gone for a Chernobog's Followers on turn 1, this Mr. Smee, if it was to challenge the Chernobog's Followers, would be removed from the board.
Yeah, good point.
So I'm wondering if maybe Martin could have sequenced this differently, gone for a Chernobog's on turn 1, and then on turn 2 played this Maleficent, and then maybe bounced it back into the hand. The Smee is going to remove the Maleficent.
Taking that 1 damage. No, I think you make a really good point. The sequence in there could have changed everything. We're going to draw into a Long Came Zeus, the second copy. Not really what Martin wants to see. There's a Merlin Rabbit in hand, a Snake. Only 2 Inkables in the hand. We are going to be questing with Chernobog's Followers, taking that draw. We find a Madam Mim Fox, which is a good pickup, especially in combination with the Rabbit in hand. Yeah,
it certainly is. The concern for Martin as well now is the fact that Yarno has ramped, even though this Smee has 2 damage counters on turn 5 or at 5 ink, you're very much anticipating Yarno maybe to play that Cogsworth. Now, if this was a Maleficent, right? So you play the Maleficent, for example, on turn 2. The Smee removes the Chernobog's Followers potentially. It would then be banished, and then you could have bounced back this Chernobog's Followers. So I'm really thinking that this Maleficent could have come down on turn 2 instead of turn 1.
Yep, I respect it. Definitely an interesting sequence to think through. We're going to be inking a Tamatoa on Yarno's side of the board. He's holding a Cogsworth, a Porpsicle, and I think that's a Baboom, and an Argus. So this Cogsworth definitely going to put in a lot of work.
So much.
That Resist 1 is going to be the ultimate protector of Mr. Smee.
Yeah, Mr. Smee, while it does not have a captain on the board, it does have Resist 1, thanks to Cogsworth, so that 1 damage which comes through at the end of the turn is going to be negated by the Resist effect from Cogsworth. But the Smee does not exert to quest, which is really curious. Yarno clearly valuing this Mr. Smee on the board instead, and I'm surprised by that. Martin's going to quest with the Chernobogs and draw.
Finds a Bell, that
hello.
accomplished mystic, I believe. Yeah, I know.
So Bell can move up to 3 damage counters from any character to any other character of your choice. So those 2 damage counters of Smee could be moved elsewhere. Now, I don't believe, Baker, that Resist is impacting Bell's ability. I'm not sure on that.
Placing...
Because it's moving damage counters, I have a feeling that resist doesn't impact that. So that's something to look out for.
Yep, I think you might be right. There is a difference between moving damage counters and doing damage. We find a whole new world for Yarno. Could sing it with the Cogsworth. Not likely to be the immediate instinct. We're going to play Porpsicle, paying 1. Draw ourselves a card. We find the lucky dime off the top. And again, like you say, Yarno in this game compared to game 2 has been able to ramp courtesy of that Mickey Mouse, and that does make a big difference. Also went first, but they did miss their turn 1 drop, which was a shame for sure.
I think Martin now in this position with that Tinkerbell in hand is going to try and get back this board control. We haven't seen them have board control at all in this series so far, but this is a different game. They're going second. We've seen a lot of card draw come through off the Chernobog's followers. If they can start to get rid of this Cogsworth and whittle down the board, then they might just be able to cross the finish line. No Fishbone Quill ramp, so it was the Mickey Mouse ramp, but that's the only ramp that Yarno's had access to.
I don't think we've seen the Fishbone Quill hit the board the entire game. Clearly, Yarno realising that it's not always going to be the most beneficial play going up against Avengers. This Cogsworth is going to be exerting. Is it going to be having a sing-song? Oh, yes it is. I thought he changed his mind halfway through there, but we do play a whole new world, and both players are going to discard their entire hands, draw 7. Martin's doing a quick check to see what's in the discard. Does have that lucky dime, but it's perfectly happy to be in the discard. Tamatoa can grab that when it's needed. Yeah,
Martin going to be looking for some goats, you would imagine. It's a little bit early for the goats, but you never really say no, would you? I mean, Martin managed to draw all 4 in the last game. Doesn't seem like they have access to any just yet. There is a Benger in there as well, which could deny the Porpsicle healing something up. Are we going to see maybe a double Cogsworth? We most certainly are. Every character on the board now has resist 2, with the Cogsworths themselves having resist 1. We see the Smee remove the snake, and it has resist 2, so only 1 damage taken back.
Great value, and maybe we now see the explanation behind the decision to just keep the Smee ready on the previous turn, seeing that if you could find that second Cogsworth off of the whole new world, then would enable this play to take out the snake and to completely survive. This Smee has really outstayed his welcome for Martin. Tons of gas, tons of questing, tons of challenging. Martin putting down a second Merlin Rabbit to draw.
And again, it goes back to that turn 1 play to play the Maleficent, right?
Yeah.
You play the Chernobog's followers and you quest, then the Smee would be getting banished if it challenges. Whereas only 1 strength on the Maleficent meant the Smee could stick around for longer, and then the Cogsworth would have gotten there. Now, of course, Yarno might not have even challenged the Chernobog's followers, but that would have meant Martin could have a little bit more lore potentially. The Magic Broom enters the board, 2 rabbits down. Martin can definitely keep trying to gain back some board control. The problem is that resist power from Cogsworth makes it very difficult to clear if you don't have a card like Be Prepared, Under the Sea, or Sisu.
Yeah, very much so. This ward keyword, incredibly powerful. Only a small handful of cards can get round it. Yarno, quite a few options in hand. We have that Bell, who will be able to quest for a lot when we get to 10 ink. We're not quite there yet. Copy of a Boom in hand.
Yeah, both players with a lot of cards available thanks to Yarno singing A Whole New World. Yarno only on 1 lore as it stands, still 19 away. Martin is at 7, so from this position, Yarno's just going to be looking to deny as much questing power from Martin as possible. So things like Grab Your Swords, Tinkerbells are going to be really very valuable. We see another Porpsicle come through, and it's going to be a Smee this time drawn by Yarno. I think it was A Whole New World. Do we ever see Bell? Bell is going to do some extra ramping because you can ink 1 extra card per turn with Bell.
Yep, the reader book ability basically acting kind of like a mini Fishbone Quill built into the body of Belle, and yeah, she's going to be a very aggressive quester. Yarno only at 1 lore at the moment, so a lot of catching up to do, but as we keep saying, these Sapphire Debts can make huge jumps, and Martin's going to reach this point where, like, you come to that decision of, am I going to continue to try and challenge the board, or am I just racing to game?
Yep.
Smee coming down.
Bumbling, mate. You know you've got a good board when you have to start playing cards on top of it.
Yes,
unless you're shifting, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that Smee is able to shift onto Bell. I'm not sure.
You know what? I've got a feeling not, but Never mind, maybe in the future. But yeah, this is a huge wide board from Yarno, and worth pointing out yet again, these two Cogsworth blanket resist 2 to every character that isn't named Cogsworth. Cogsworth gets a resist 1 from each other, but yeah, this is going to be a hard board to deal with, like you just said, Joe, without access to things like Be Prepared that just ignore damage completely. So yeah, Martin definitely has a hill to climb to be able to equalize this field, so might not even bother, might just continue to race. He's got quite a few cards in hand. We find a Queen's Castle, which could distract some attention from Yarno's board away from questing, but at the same time, Yarno may reach a point where he can just race the game.
Yeah, and this Mr. Smee just able to remove a rabbit and not even take a single bit of damage back thanks to that resist 2 from double Cogsworth.
Didn't even feel it, mate. Not a thing. This Cogsworth is keeping him well protected. Martin's still, of course, drawing a card off the rabbit, and yeah, has quite a few cards in hand. Weighing up options here. Of course, we are in the top 16. It is all to play for. The winner of this game will win themselves a Mickey Mouse. We pass back over to Martin finally, who's going to ready, set, draw. Finds a Merlin goat off the top. Okay, this is the start. This is how you start building a board and just chasing that lore. Of course, preferably you always want to try and bounce these goats back to your hand with the likes of Madam Mim Snake and Madam Mim Fox, but at the same time, this is a nice wide board that Martin's building here. Played 4 for the goat, 3 for the Mr. Smee. This is a little bit more like it. Still doesn't have quite the dominance that Yarno has with that resist 2 and just pure amount of characters, but now that Martin has a wide board, he could potentially quest very aggressively. We are going to remove that broom, drawing a card off the top.
Yeah, all characters on Martin's side of the board with that 3 willpower means it's going to need something like a Tinkerbell and a Grab Your Swords to clear the questing potential from them. So Yarno is going to be hoping to have access to that. No Tinkerbell currently available on the board. No Tinkerbell in hand either. The hand is Rise of the Titans, Mr. Smee, Mickey Mouse and Baboom. So Yarno, as wide as the board is starting to run out of removal options.
Yeah, it's a bit underwhelming really, isn't it? Unfortunately, I think Yarno really needs to put a lot of faith in this board that he's built up.
5 lore from Bell, however. If there's 10 ink in the inkwell, this Bell is going to quest for 5.
Still weighing up options here. Again, we've still got another 22 minutes. This is the last game. By all means, take your time. We're potentially moving on to the top 8 here, so really think it through. Make sure that you are considering all the lines, considering the options. We're seeing 2 Babooms hit the inkwell, 1 just for inking.
It was Rise of the Titans.
Oh, it might have been, but 1 card just from normal inking, and then the other one, I believe, was Bell's Read a Book.
Bell questing for 5, Cogsworth for 2, Smee for 2, Mickey Mouse for 1, Smee for 2, and Cogsworth for 2 as well. That is a lot of lore, which Yarno is adding up for us. I'm not
is
even...
that 14? If Bell's questing for 4, sorry, for 5. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yep, there you go. That was one heck of a turn. Yarno going all the way to 16. Going to play another Mr. Smee and a Mickey Mouse Detective. Just full extension of the board. A bit more rampant, saying, have an answer to this or I am going on to top 8. Can Martin interrupt this board?
Martin needs 10 lore. They're not going to be able to clear everything. Nope. They do have a goat available. They've got some questing power on the board, as well as a goat on the board. So they're going to quest with everything. That's a quest for 4. Martin's now up to 14 lore with a goat on the board and a goat in hand. 6 lore more needed. It's going to be a magic broom for 1. That's not going to gain any lore.
Nope.
Goat is going to come through, bumping them up to 15. The magic broom's going to draw. They find a Grab Your Swords, but it seems like it's too little too late. The Benja's going to get inked. The Smee's going to hit the board, but Yarno is going to be victorious and has got themselves a golden Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor.
What a game, Joe. I'm super fascinated that not once was Lucky Dime utilised, and we saw Tamatoa once, and I believe it only quested for 2. So incredible games from both of these players. Yeah, unfortunately, just our Sapphire Steel player able to just develop too much. I think that double Cogsworth was just